Right now, scattered across the planet and even beyond it, humanity is quietly building tombs. Not for the dead, for ourselves. Vaults buried inside frozen mountains, sealed in billion-year-old bedrock, hidden in salt mines. And one of them isn't even on Earth anymore. Each one is designed to survive the end of the world. And here's what's strange. They don't all hold the same thing. One holds the genetic code of dying animals, frozen alive. One holds every line of computer code we've ever written. One holds the entire story of who we are, carved into stone. One is sitting on the surface of the moon right now. And one, the most chilling of all, was built not to save something for the future, but to warn the future to stay away from it. Today we're going through the most extraordinary Doomsday vaults ever built. What's inside each one, why we made it, and what it secretly reveals about how frightened we really are. Because every one of these vaults is a message in a bottle, thrown forward in time. And some of those messages are deeply unsettling. And notice this before we go in. Almost every one of these places was built in just the last 20 years or so. For all of history, humanity barely thought about deep future backups at all. And then, in a single generation, we started building them everywhere, all at once. That timing is its own quiet clue. Something about this particular moment made us start preparing for our own absence. Keep that in mind as we go, because by the end, it'll be hard to ignore. Let's start with the one most people have heard of, because it sets the rules for all the others. Deep inside a frozen mountain on a remote Arctic island, far closer to the North Pole than to any city, sits the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, the original Doomsday Vault. Behind its reinforced doors, locked in permafrost, are over 1 million different varieties of crop seeds. Not 1 million seeds, 1 million varieties, adding up to hundreds of millions of individual seeds. Rice, wheat, beans, barley, the entire edible foundation of human civilization. The genius is the location. It's buried deep in ground that stays frozen all year round. So even if the power died and every human walked away forever, the natural cold of the rock would keep those seeds viable for up to 200 years on its own. They even built it 5 stories above the highest level the oceans could reach if every sheet of ice on Earth melted at once. They did that math on purpose. And it runs on a brilliant rule called the black box system. When a country deposits its seeds, it still owns them completely. Norway, which built the vault, never owns a single seed inside it, and only the depositor can ever withdraw their own. It's the world's safe deposit box. It holds your treasure, but the key stays in your hand. That's why nations that trust each other with nothing else will still trust this frozen mountain. And the reason it has to exist is sobering on its own. There are around 1,700 other seed banks scattered across the world, each holding the crops of its region, but those are fragile. They sit in ordinary buildings, exposed to fires, floods, blackouts, budget cuts, and conflict. Any one of them can be wiped out in an afternoon. Svalbard is the backup for all of them, the safety net beneath every other safety net. And it has already been used for real once. A major seed collection, a priceless library of crops bred for harsh, dry climates, gathered over decades, became unusable when the region around it was torn apart by war. But years earlier, its keepers had quietly sent duplicates of most of it up to the frozen vault, just in case. So when their home base was lost, they did something no one had ever done before. They made the first ever withdrawal from the Doomsday Vault, pulled out their backed up seeds, regrew the collection safely elsewhere, and then redeposited fresh copies back into the ice. The insurance policy paid out, exactly as designed. But here's the unsettling twist. In 2017, the vault itself had a scare. Unusually warm temperatures sent meltwater leaking into the entrance tunnel, where it then froze. The seeds were untouched. They sit far deeper in. But think about the irony. The Doomsday Vault, built to need no help from humans, suddenly needed help from humans. The very kind of warming world that makes the vault necessary came knocking on its own front door. But here's where it gets interesting, because seeds will only get you so far. A pile of seeds can regrow a wheat field. It cannot regrow a civilization. It can't tell the survivors how anything works. And someone realized that. So less than a mile away from the seed vault, inside the very same mountain in an abandoned coal mine, sits a second vault with a completely different mission, the Arctic World Archive. This one doesn't store food, it stores knowledge. And the way it does it is clever, because every form of memory we use today is dangerously fragile. Hard drives die in years. The cloud vanishes the instant the power does. So instead, the archive writes data onto a special film, light-sensitive crystals on tough polyester, that needs no electricity at all and is built to last for 500 to 1,000 years. They've already stored the historical records of entire nations, masterpiece paintings, and irreplaceable manuscripts inside that mountain. And then, in 2020, this archive received one of the strangest deposits in human history. A snapshot of essentially all the world's open-source software code, the actual building blocks of our entire digital civilization, 21 terabytes of it, written onto nearly 200 reels of film and buried in the ice. Think about what that really is. It's a backup of how to rebuild the modern world. If everything collapsed, a future people who dug it up would, in theory, hold the source code for the programs that ran our banks, our power grids, our entire technological existence. We took the invisible nervous system of the 21st century and froze a physical copy of it inside an Arctic mountain, just in case we ever need to reboot the world from scratch. Now we move from preserving knowledge to something far more ambitious, preserving life itself at the genetic level. In San Diego, there's a place its own scientists describe as neutron stars of biodiversity. It's called the Frozen Zoo, and it might be the most science fiction location on this entire list. Inside tanks of liquid nitrogen, chilled to around -320 degrees Fahrenheit, sit the living cells of vanishing animals. More than 11,000 cell lines from over 1,300 species. Skin cells, eggs, embryos, all frozen in suspended animation. All still technically alive, just paused. At that temperature, every biological process simply stops, and a cell can wait, unchanging, for decades, or far longer. It was founded back in the 1970s, long before anyone knew what to even do with the cells, on a bet that one day the technology would catch up. And this is not a museum where the exhibits just sit on a shelf. This is where it becomes astonishing. Cells frozen in that zoo have already been used to bring animals back. They thawed cells from an endangered horse that had been frozen since the 1980s and used them to clone a living, breathing foal in 2020. A foal carrying genes that had been locked in ice for 40 years. Genes that were essentially extinct in the living population. They did the same with an endangered ferret. They thawed the frozen reproductive cells of a vanishing sea creature and produced living offspring. The Frozen Zoo is, quite literally, a library where the books can be turned back into living things. Its founder built it on a bet that didn't even make sense at the time, that one day we'd invent technologies that could turn these frozen specks back into animals. He was right. It's a vault that doesn't just remember extinct life, it holds the power to undo extinction. And every year, as more species vanish from the wild, the frozen versions in those tanks become more irreplaceable, sometimes the only copies left. So far, every vault we've seen relies on cold and on machinery. And that's a hidden weakness, because cold needs maintenance, and machines eventually fail. Which brings us to a vault that took the exact opposite approach, betting on something far more permanent than electricity. In the mountains of Austria sits the oldest salt mine continuously worked by humans, and buried inside it is a project called the Memory of Mankind. Its goal is staggering in its simplicity, to preserve the story of our entire civilization, not for centuries, but for the deep future, and to do it without a single wire or refrigerator. The trick is the material. They etch text and images onto tablets of fired ceramic, essentially stoneware, which can survive water, fire, and time almost indefinitely. And they store them inside the salt mine, because salt absorbs all moisture, dries the air, and slowly seals every crack, naturally entombing whatever's placed inside it. But the Memory of Mankind has a twist so poetic, it almost sounds invented. The geology of that salt mountain means that over hundreds of thousands of years, the buried chamber will slowly migrate upward, and eventually deliver itself back to the surface, like the planet itself is set to hand our story back to whoever's around to find it. The mouth of the cavern is closing at roughly the speed your fingernails grow, which gives the project only about 40 years to finish filling it before nature seals the door for good. And to solve the problem of how anyone would ever find it, they hand out small ceramic tokens to people today, each one a map pointing back to the archive. The idea is that someone, someday, might inherit one of these strange tokens, follow the trail to a salt mountain, and dig up the collected memory of a civilization that may no longer exist. And then there's the vault that decided Earth itself wasn't safe enough, so it left the planet. It's called the Lunar Library, and it is exactly what it sounds like, a backup of human civilization sitting on the surface of the moon. The logic is almost brutally simple. Every vault on Earth, no matter how clever, shares one fatal flaw. It's on Earth. Whatever catastrophe might wipe us out could plausibly take our vaults with it. So the only way to be truly safe is to keep a copy somewhere else entirely. The team behind it wanted a place with no weather, no war, no decay, no rust. And the airless, dead-still surface of the moon is about as permanent as anywhere we can currently reach. So they encoded a staggering archive onto thin disks of pure nickel, a metal chosen because it can survive for, by some estimates, billions of years. Etched into those disks, at microscopic scale, is an archive of tens of millions of pages, the entire English Wikipedia, tens of thousands of books, and, crucially, a guide to thousands of human languages with over 1 billion sample translations, a kind of built-in Rosetta Stone, so a future finder could actually decode the rest. The first copy launched in 2019 aboard a small lander that crashed on impact. The library is likely still up there, scattered across the surface but intact, somewhere near the crash site, waiting. A later attempt succeeded, gently setting a copy down on the moon in 2024. Think about the strangeness of that. While we argue and work and worry down here, there is already a copy of our collective knowledge sitting silently in the lunar dust, built to outlast not just us, but possibly the Earth itself. If the worst ever happened here, the last and longest surviving record of who we were might not be on our own planet at all. It would be up there, glinting faintly in the gray, waiting for eyes that may never come. And now we come to the last vault, and it breaks the entire pattern, because it was not built to preserve anything. It was built to imprison something, and to scream a warning across an almost unimaginable span of time. Deep in the bedrock of Finland, more than 400 meters down, carved into rock that is 1.9 billion years old, is a place called Onkalo, Finnish for the cavity. It is the world's first permanent tomb for high-level nuclear waste. The spent fuel from nuclear reactors is being sealed into thick copper canisters and buried in tunnels deep underground. And then, this is the key part, the whole thing will eventually be sealed shut forever, designed to need no guards, no power, no human attention ever again. Because it has to stay sealed and safe, not for a century, not for 1,000 years, but for up to 100,000 years, far longer than our entire species has even existed in its modern form. And that creates a problem so strange, it sounds more like philosophy than engineering. How do you warn a person 100,000 years from now to stay away? Every language we speak today will be long dead. The very symbols we use for danger might mean nothing, or worse, might look like an invitation, a marker of buried treasure. Serious teams of scientists, linguists, and artists have actually wrestled with this exact question, and their proposed solutions are haunting. Vast fields of menacing concrete spikes erupting from the ground to physically feel hostile. Enormous stone monuments carved with the message that this is not a place of honor, that nothing valued is buried here. One group even proposed breeding the warning into culture itself, encoding "do not dig here" into myth, ritual, and legend, hoping a story could survive on its own across 1,000 generations, long after anyone remembered why. Onkalo is the perfect inversion of every other vault on this list. The seed vault, the data archive, the frozen zoo, the memory mine, the library on the moon, all of them are saying to the future, please, find this. We want you to have it. Onkalo is the only one saying the opposite. Whatever you do, never open this. Forget it's even here. So step back and look at what we've actually built. 6 tombs, scattered across the Earth and even onto the Moon, each one a different answer to the same terrifying question. What do we save when we imagine ourselves gone? We saved the seeds so something could eat. We saved the code so something could rebuild. We saved the cells so we could resurrect what we drove extinct. We saved our story in stone and on the Moon so we wouldn't be forgotten. And we buried our poison so deep and marked it so carefully that we hope it outlives every other thing we've ever made. Look at that list altogether, and a strange portrait of us emerges. We are a species that has quietly accepted that something might end us and has already started packing for it. And remember what we noticed at the very start? We built nearly all of this within a single generation, not over the long sweep of history, now. These vaults are letters we're writing to a future that may not include us, sealed in ice and salt and billion-year-old stone and lunar dust. And the most unsettling thought of all is also the simplest. You don't build this many backups for a world you're confident will survive. We build them because, somewhere deep down, we've already begun to wonder if it won't.